Welcome to this session of Black History Lunchtime Conversations, and Richard Anderson is just introducing Professor Fuatchak.
Mr. Fuatchak is joining us from Jos University in Nigeria, and he's going to expand upon some of the conversations we've had in the past few weeks on a community project to develop educational resources in Nigeria. So I will hand it over to you, Professor Sati. Still can't hear you.
Okay, Professor Sati.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's better. If you can do it a bit louder, that would be great.
Okay, maybe I need to shout.
Yes,
I'm so sorry for, the previous sessions, I don't know what happened. The sound was very poor. But today it looks fairly good, but I hope that it will continue to be like that so that I can pass on a few things concerning the project I'm involved in. Yeah, there is this project is from the National Research Fund in Nigeria. It is sponsored by the Tertiary Education Trust Fund. It's a competitive research that myself and 12 other colleagues in the University of Jos and in Plateau State University, cutting across two disciplines, history and education, are involved in. The project is entitled History from Below, Innovative Technologies and the Basic Education Curriculum. It's basically a research that hopes to provide a resource or resource material for the teaching of history at lower levels or the lowest levels in Nigeria's educational system. That is to teach history at primary, what we call primary and junior secondary schools, the 9 years of basic education in Nigeria. So it's to provide a resource book for the teaching of history at those levels. Now, why was this project conceived and what does it aim to achieve? The project was conceived because for a long time, for over 30 years, the Nigerian government abolished history from the curriculum of the lower levels of education. History was abolished and replaced with social studies and civic education. So between 1983 and about 2017, history was never taught at those levels. Now, what we came to see was a generation of Nigerians, the younger generation of Nigerians, who had no idea or who did not learn history in schools and were not inculcated into the historical trajectory, the developmental process, the challenges, the successes, and other things that they really needed to know about the country. In fact, it was so bad that some couldn't know, some of the nationalists that fought for our independence, they couldn't even know the immediate past presidents of the country. They couldn't know what some people had done and what had not done. But the Historical Society, between the year 2000, when democracy was returned, and 2017, had consistently gone to meet the presidents of Nigeria, gone to meet the ministers of education to tell them that it is important to return history to the curriculum of basic education. The President Obasanjo gave a directive, but it ended at the ministry. The books were never produced. The bureaucracy swallowed it up. The same thing with Yaradua, the same thing with Jonathan, until the present president came and the Historical Society mounted the pressure, and then the government accepted that history should be returned to those basic levels of education. Now, with the restoration of history, the syllabus has two, or the curriculum has two components. it requires that, or it includes the teaching of national history and the teaching of local history. Now, the national history curriculum is very easy to draw by historians because we all know the general framework of the national history. But then in that document approving the teaching of history at the lower levels, there was a requirement that 30% of the history curriculum should be drawn from local context because children at a tender age would not be able to understand when you mention the president of Nigeria, but they would be able to understand when you mention their local government chairman, when you mention their councillor, when you mention their local leaders, they will be able to understand. So those local components, that local content can only be generated at the specific levels of individual states. It cannot be generated nationally. So when there was a call on the National Research Fund for the History and Social Studies scheme, we thought this was an opportunity to launch into it to provide a 30% local content. And so we put ourselves together and drew the proposal that we needed to collect materials that will help in generating the 30% local content. We were lucky. The proposal passed various stages of screening and it was approved for national funding. So the aim of the research is to generate the 30% local content for the teaching of history at at primary school and junior secondary school level. This material would be useful for people teaching at those levels so that when they go to any local community, there's always available, there should be available a material handy that describes the local history of the specific communities where teachers might be posted. Now, the second aim of the project would be for us as intellectuals to publish academic articles, apart from writing for junior secondary schools or primary schools, to publish academic articles on local history that will populate national history and discourses on national history. So we, in our proposal, said we will therefore generate this material and write the articles from generating local resources through conducting oral interviews in the different communities, meeting with stockholders, meeting with community people, meeting with local people, meeting with their chiefs, meeting with their religious leaders, meeting with their community leaders, and discussing with them what their history is. So we look at oral interviews as one major source. The second major source is to visit the archives. We have three major archives in Nigeria. We have one in Kaduna, we have one in Enugu, we have one in Ibadan. So we will go to these archives and get materials related to Plateau history and put them together, weave them together with the oral interviews. Then there are local texts, local historical texts. Some of the ethnic groups have already published their local histories. We will also read them. Some have papers published, and some are conference papers, some are speeches that relate to the history of the people. We will collect them. We will also visit historical sites. Many of the communities have historical sites that maybe relate to their tradition of origin, relate to their ritual sites, relate to their farmlands or aspects of their history. So we'll visit those places and document them, get the photographs and keep them. So we'll collect photographs as aspects of what we're doing. We will look at this together and write two separate materials, one for the lower levels, and that is going to be very tasking because as university people, to write historical materials for primary schools, we need to tone down the language to meet their own specification, and then write the one for the academic community, which people of the higher institutions can read. So it's going to have two versions. The version for the lower level, written in simple English, written in the language that the students can understand, and illustrated with photographs and pictures so that the children at that level can follow. But the academic materials that will come from journal articles, the language will be academic, it will be analytical, it will be not descriptive, but for the junior ones, it's just going to be largely descriptive. But for the academic ones, it's going to be analytical because that is what history at that level entails. So we hope to visit 17 local governments in Plateau State. There are over 54 ethnic groups, so we will share ourselves, we'll use assistance, we'll draw questions, research questions, and then use research assistance, and we ourselves will also go to the field to generate these materials. And then we'll transcribe the information, keep them in CDs and other retrievable devices for future generations to use maybe as a primary source.
Professor Satie, it's so interesting. And one or two people have messaged to say how difficult it is to hear. So I know you've been kind enough in the past to write us a short article. Would you be able to write us something so that people can read it through and check that they've got exactly what it is you're talking about? That would be really helpful.
Yeah, I can post this immediately I'm done. I have an 8-page slide which I can share. Yeah, I have an 8-page slide that I will share. Yeah.
That would be brilliant. And then when we've got a better connection, we can have a discussion with you about it. Okay. Because Helen's nodding, Jim's nodding, Gloria's nodding. Right, that's fine.
Okay. Well,
and Sarah's
on this side. Okay, I will. So maybe I will stop here and then post the slides to you, and then you can read from home. But if anyone can hear me at all, yeah.
No, it's really difficult. Everybody's struggling. Okay, then. Thank you very much indeed. Okay. Thank you for joining us today. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you. And I'm sure everybody would want to thank you. But what we'll do is we'll hold till we've had a chance to read it all through, and then we'll move on. Okay, thank you so much. Right, well, we've taken our time today, and I apologize for my difficulty with connectivity. I'm now tethered to somebody's phone, so that's good. Shows there are options with technology. Right, so what I'd like to do now, Cassandra, are you there?
Yeah, hi, I'm here.
How lovely to see you. This is just beautiful. Now, Jim, you're there, are you?
I'm here.
Yeah, lovely. Now, over the last weeks and months, several things have become clear that we know that some of us know little about. And it's important that we follow those things up. And one of the things is the stories about indentured labour and the enormous implications of that step along the road of colonialisation. So Cassandra, I know you're going to talk a little bit about maybe the resources you've produced in Nottingham, but then you're also going to talk a little about indentured labour, I think, and then Jim's also going to chip in, but we'll be coming back to this topic again in one of our conversations over the next few weeks. So over to you, Cassandra.
Hi, everyone. And I'd just like to make special mention that Professor Samaru is here. He's like one of the best historians in Trinidad and Tobago, and he's really an expert when it comes to indentured labor. So I can talk a little bit about my experience, but he's really the one who is, his career and everything, academia is focused on that, as well as, many different things in Trinidad. So yeah, I just want to say that first of all. And also, hi, my name is Cassandra. I'm a research fellow at University of Hull. And so Liz invited me to talk a little bit about my experience, not from an academic perspective, but just me as an Indo-Caribbean person from Trinidad, also living here in the UK. But I also was in talks with Liz about our resources. I used to work at University of Nottingham. So what we developed there is a set of resources that will help teachers. But this was on the following Black Lives Matter movement. So, you know, the schools in that area really wanted to help students understand what is Nottingham links with slavery, as well as understand who are some of the local Black heroes in Nottingham. So our resources, I'll just share my screen because, yes, fortunately, the resources that we were working on, it finally came to fruition this week. So Liz will give you all the link later on, but this is how the website looks. And yeah, this is how the website looks. And we have a lot of resources on, we have a glossary of terminology, and we have George Africanus, we have on Eric Irons, who I'll be talking about today, as well as we have Nottingham's links to slavery in Jamaica. And my colleague focused on Robert Smith, Lord Carrington. And it was a really interesting project to work on. Just to give you a brief idea of Eric Irons though, when we tried to produce this resource, this is how it looks in the PDF form, but I'll just do a brief presentation. We have the resource focusing on teachers basically, and what a lot of them lack confidence in how to go about teaching, and a lot of, when it comes to transatlantic slavery or terminologies when they're referring to people of color, what's the accepted terminology. So this resource, it is supposed to promote a holistic narrative of who the heroes are in Nottingham. And so students can see themselves represented in the curriculum in a positive way. So fortunately, we were able to get the unpublished memoir of Eric Irons from his family. And he was not able to publish it, but he wrote it in 2009. And so we just have a little caveat to teachers that some of the terminologies are outdated and they should exercise caution when they're teaching it. So this is just, I'm going to go through the presentation fast because I know we don't have much time, but this is what the PDF, the resources look like. So it's quite comprehensive. And there's a lot of information on Eric Irons and George Africanus already online, but there's less known about his life in Portland, Jamaica, where like his life with his dad growing up in Spanish Town. How did he meet his wife? His wife was white, so they had an interracial love story, which, you know, was quite interesting for the times. Yes, and so this is how Eric Irons, this was him, I mean, later on in his life. He grew up in Portmore. He was born in Wellington Street in Spanish Town, but he grew up with his grandmother in Portland. And his dad's name was Benjamin Irons. He also had a sister, well, his nickname was Papa Man. This is his sister, Ruth Irons. I'm just running through it quickly because I don't want to go too long. Yeah, so in the resources, we also try to bring in some information about Jamaica, because a lot of the students, whatever they learn is basically when it comes to slavery and the Caribbean. So again, like Eric Irons had mentioned about why is Portland, why do they have Freetown, why is it called Freetown? So we just have like these little snippets that teachers could go into more detail as to why this place in Jamaica was called Freetown. I grew up with Anansi stories, but people here may not know about it. So we mentioned Anansi and Maroon stories, and Nani or Granny Nani. She's a heroine in Jamaica. A lot of people may not know that. So this is also a way to introduce the resistance of freedom fighting in the British West Indies, which is something that is not talked about much in the curriculum. So it's another interesting thing about Eric Irons. Yes, this is his mom. This is his dad and his stepmother here. This is primary school that he went to. It's running through quickly. This is his mother. He didn't really grow up with her. So basically, Eric Irons, he moved to the UK in 1944, and he was part of the Royal Air Force. And he was part of the Royal Air Force for 7 years. This is him in his uniform here. He was part of the Air Force from 1944 to 1952. So he eventually became, orderly room clerk. He eventually got promoted to corporal. He did not go back to Jamaica because he thought he could not provide the quality of life that he wanted for his wife and children. So he stayed here, and he was quite popular when it came to sports. He also talked about prejudice in the RAF, that it did exist in theory, but was not, in theory, prejudice was not tolerated. But of course, he experienced prejudice in the RAF. This, interestingly, I think a lot of teachers found this fascinating. This is his wife, Nell, who he met in 1945. And so we just have information about their first encounter from Eric Irons, mouth. This is what happened. He went to Nottingham and he saw her and he liked her. He actually said her hair was black, really black, and he thought she was Indian. So that was interesting. And he asked her out and everything, and she said yes, which is quite unique for that time because, they were an interracial couple. And given the time period, this was like right before the riots in Nottingham. So it was quite an interesting time. And this is his in-laws. He talked about when he met them as well. It's all in the resources. This is them on their wedding day. And they lived at Pennyfoot Street, and they had 6 children, 16 grandchildren. Most of their children live in Nottingham. Yeah, so I'm going through this quickly. So all of this is just about the discrimination he experienced in civilian life after he left the RAF, which is quite difficult for him. It talked about what he did to fight this discrimination. Yeah, he was a champion for racial equality and social justice. He was a promoter of education, and he also was instrumental in implemented certain vocational and educational courses to assist communities to settle, integrate, and contribute to the city. So Eric Irons helped establish numerous courses here, and I'm going to get to this just soon, which is interesting because we were talking about East Indian indentureship. He had engagement with the Asian community in Nottingham. So his engagement with the Asian community was specifically mainly aligned with Asian women. And so he had to figure out a way to get women to come to classes. So he and the council instituted language classes catering to Asian women. But what happened was that it was sparsely supported. So he learned how he had to communicate with these women. He first addressed letters to these women specifically, and no one came to the meetings to talk about, these classes. He learned that he had to address the letters to the husbands. And then a lot after he addressed the letters to come to this meeting to the Indian and Pakistani community leaders and the husbands, that's when the women came out and they felt more comfortable to come out to these meetings. The outcome of that meeting was one of the most successful English language and current affairs classes for Hindu, Muslim, and Sikh women. And so people in other parts of Nottingham, people in other parts of England were coming to Eric Irons to find out how to engage with Asian women. So that's an interesting topic. And also in his memoir, he talked about why is it that he was able to relate to different communities. So he was close to the Muslim community, Pakistani and Indian community. So he talked about when he grew up on the banana plantation in Jamaica. And so what happened was that one of the incidents he talked about is that they had a lot of Sikh people living there. And so when his grandmother invited Hindus over to their place, they would also make sure to scald all the utensils because they eat beef, but the Hindus don't. So from a young age though, if you read between the lines, he already had an understanding of multiculturalism and respect for other ethnicities. And so that's why he was able to engage so well with not only South Asian, not only the South Asian community, but also the East Asian community. He found it very hard to connect with the Chinese community, but he made some contacts and he also helped them set up a East Asian community center. Yeah, so he also had a lot of engagement with women's groups. He helped establish 3 women's groups, and these women groups, they also helped to establish the Commonwealth Unity Week. And I just want to mention that there will be a phase 2 if we get funding for it. There will be a phase 2 on Eric Irons and his engagement with the West Indian community, but also the South Asian and East Asian community. We're working on trying to get funding so that we could tell Eric Irons' story, holistically. It's not only about like Black Caribbean, groups that he helped. It's also about the Indian community, and it's also about the Chinese community that he worked with. So very quickly, this is just in the resources. He talked about what did he do to bring about change in the place he was working at. By the time he left, there was over 1,137 Asians and West Indians who were employed at the depot where he first encountered discrimination when he started to work there. He also helped, with the Nottingham City Transport Department so that the color bar would be, lifted and they could employ people of color in the transport industry. He also helped in terms of the labor exchange. They used to treat West Indians when they first come. They used to treat them very badly. He also brought attention to that. Also racism in the pubs. He also brought attention to that and brought about some change. He also loved cricket. So he talked about the need to have a place of our own to give them a measure of stability. And that would enable them to be accepted and return hospitality while they were in Britain, living there as newly, immigrant population. So yes, he was a bridge for the community. His house was most often the first port of call for West Indians who moved, right, from Jamaica, from Trinidad, who moved to Nottingham. So he would also have fireside chats with them. He was basically a leader and a trailblazer in the community. He's most known for his this was his role in the Nottingham race riots in 1958. It's all in the resources, but it was very interesting, the role that he played and why it is these race riots happened in the first place. So Eric Irons, to conclude, is basically well known for being Britain's first Black Justice of the Peace. So that's why these resources were so important, to tell these students the story, because he's not only important to Nottingham, but to the whole of Britain. He was also criticized by other West Indians, actually, for being too complacent and optimistic about the situation. This is him with his family. He received numerous honors. He received an OBE. He met the Queen. So he was, quite well known in his area. He received an honorary master's as well. Yeah. So these are the resources and these are the activities that teachers will talk to students about. We have discussion questions. We have a lot of critically thinking discussion questions on this that will help students contextualize Eric Irons and what was the reaction to his appointment. How was it received by people in Britain and Nottingham? So that's the one on Eric Irons. And I won't have time to go into the George Africanus one, but on the website, George Africanus, you all already had a discussion about that, but he's quite well known already as being Nottingham's first Black entrepreneur. His story is quite interesting, so you can check out the resources. There is a new bit here that I don't see a lot online, which is that his wife was quite impressive in her own right. She also sued her son-in-law successfully for a £200 debt. That was quite interesting. This is a recreation of his home that Belong Nottingham worked on. And there's just a lot of information on this area.
Thank you so much. This is so interesting. As I say, we had colleagues from Wolverhampton who spoke about George Africanus' story, and I remember doing some work on it when I was based there. An amazing story, and then he moved to Nottingham, and you took ownership. I think it's fascinating, but your resources are remarkable. They are so well presented and such a good example. I've taken time to have a look at the website, and I do apologize because of all the issues. I haven't sent an update round to people with the contact details, but that's under nottinghammuseums.org.uk. I won't read all the rest out, but absolutely fantastic. Yes. Thank you, Cassandra.
Yes, thank you. And so I just wanted to say that these resources were very interesting and they were very fun to create, and you also check out the website. And there will be a phase 2 on the Eric Irons, so I'll keep you guys updated on that. and how it engages with the South Asian community as well. So yeah, thank you.
Well, that's absolutely wonderful. Now, I've got a little idea now, Cassandra. I'm going to say thank you, real big thank you to you.
Yeah.
And Jim, I know you've rushed and come back from the hospital and you're there.
Yes.
Jim, I'm just wondering, would you mind very much if Gloria tells us about her story first?
I think so. No problem. I'd rather hear from other colleagues. As you say, I hope this indentured labourship will come up from time to time, and there'll be plenty of time for me to contribute. I've did some preparation, but I'll share that through email. But I'd rather hear from either colleague.
Okay. Well, what
Cassandra was excellent. Cassandra was so good.
Thank you.
And I feel so good to see young people showing an interest. And I would like to share my resources with her or anyone. I've got quite a bit on slavery, indentureship, all thing I've written over 30 years. And I have to share it. So no problem at all. Good to meet you, Cassandra.
Nice to meet you too.
That's wonderful. So Jim, maybe we've said that we'll let these sessions run longer than our normal session. But let's ask Gloria, if you don't mind. It seems unfair because we've not met Gloria before, but Gloria, you're doing great work, I understand, in Bristol. So can you unmute yourself? Unmute yourself.
I've done that. Can you hear me?
We can hear you fine now.
Okay.
So tell us all about these plaques.
Hello, Liz. Thanks very much for inviting me, and that's really super interesting. I want to say a special thanks to Cassandra. My grandmother had a daughter called Cassandra in Barbados, so it's lovely to see your name up there as well. And my own sister is called Sandra after her, so that is really fantastic. And I would really appreciate knowing, having the resources to what you shared with us, because it was so inspiring, and it's really great to hear those voices told and those stories told, because obviously we hear so much. It was fantastic to hear the talk from the professor of Sweden. I'm just going to say to everybody, I am a descendant of enslaved people. So my great-great-grandfather was born on a plantation in Barbados. I am of mixed heritage. So my father was from the Caribbean, Barbados. My mother was from Ireland. They met in the 1950s in the UK. I have been to the Caribbean many, many times, and like everybody, last year we were all affected by the pandemic. Because I was born in the 1960s, I have experienced much racism. I am not a professor, so this is an unacademic talk. So I appreciate all your hallowed ears. Anyway, getting back to why Liz invited me here. After the disgraceful murder, lynching, if you will, of George Floyd, even though we know so many before and after that event, and we're calling that a lynching because that's what it was when it was done in public, I was driven to action myself as a citizen of humanity. I decided to do some more research into my family history, and I discovered in actual fact, my cousin had discovered this before, but I hadn't looked into it so clearly, that the people who had enslaved our great-great-grandfather, who was called John Isaac Daniel, were very wealthy merchants, citizens, MPs, etc., from Bristol. So I started doing some research. One of the first things I did was actually it's so interesting because the first professor, I think it was Professor Jim, when he was talking to us, he, it's very much the white gaze on what has done. So it's like, oh, we haven't looked at this. This is the work that's being uncovered. But when you are a descendant, what I was doing was turning my gaze back on the colonialists, back on the imperialists, back on the people who were brutal to my ancestors. So, there is, as he said, there's a lot of many, many things to be discussed. Anyway, I found about this family, and I decided to do something about it. I visited the home that he had brought with, in England. We had the Abolition of Slavery Act in 1833. What people don't really talk about so much was that was driven not by any sense of compassion for the people they enslaved. It was driven by economics, and the economics of the Abolition of Slavery Act, as we know, was £20 million in compensation given to the owners of enslaved people in Britain. 46,000 awards made, £20 million, which is utterly millions and millions of pounds in today's money. John Isaac was one of those people. I found one of the houses that was bought around about this time. The reason why I visited this house, this was exactly the same time as the Colston Statue came down. The reason why I visited this house was because online, when I started doing my research, the people who lived there said the house and the house and the information around the house, which was in Studley in Devon, was shrouded in mystery. Well, I spent 10 minutes on the internet and it certainly wasn't shrouded in history. They also said that the previous owner had been called somebody called Thomas Carew. This person was actually called Thomas Carew Daniel. As you see, shares the same surname as me. These were the family who related to the people who received compensation for my great-great-grandfather and 4,424 other individuals. That made me look more at the church. The church had been patronised by this family. They were lords of the manor, and what the Southwest Archaeology Company, which still exists, talked about the building being done up by this family. There were lots of plaques in there to this family. There were many stained glass windows to this family, but there was no information about how they made their money. So for me, it was investigating why this was so, why we didn't know. And I believed if I turned my gaze back to the imperialists, to the colonialists, to the slaveholders, to the financiers of this system, in essence, it empowers you as a descendant. It is not taught in schools, but you can go out and find this information yourself. And for me, the most hypocritical nature of Britain, obviously it's great to hear about Sweden, Denmark, etc., but the most hypocritical nature is this sense of not looking correctly, being able to go past churches, go past buildings, and it just glorifies their existence. And that for me is incredibly wrong. So I went on to the wonderful facility of the UCL, Legacies of British Slave Ownership, is now called the Legacies of British Slavery, as the gaze again is turning away from the white colonialists and back to the enslaved people, which is the true story which should be told, because this is a story we have not told. So I used their wonderful resources, and I stumbled across a name that came up several times about providing information, and I did what we all do today, and I called that person, and that person happened to be a descendant of this slaveholding family. And we talked, we discussed, it was very interesting. We are 21st century people, we can talk about these things. So she was being filmed by the BBC, and the BBC asked if, when they learnt that we had talked, they asked for us to be filmed. I realised there was a significant memorial in Bristol Cathedral, so I asked for this meeting to happen in the cathedral. And again, you know, to my horror, I had never been to Bristol, but there were hundreds and hundreds of memorials to enslaved owners, owners of enslaved people, slaveholders. And again, nothing really, the church at the time, the cathedral at the time, were very much driving a message of saying, we're covering up the huge Colston window. This is something that was told in the press a lot. In fact, when I got there, it was actually just the coat of arms that was being covered up. So, you know, we all understand that this story is a story of cover up and deceit. But what I like to think about is it's the deceit of all of us, not just black people, not just white people. This is deceit of all of us if we do not truly examine what makes man's inhumanity to man just so dreadful. Anyway, I'm going to cut to the chase because I realise that it's been a long time, so I will quickly get to the point. I spent a year doing as much research as I could on this family, talking to all the organisations. That his ancestor has put a lot of information up on various websites about him, but I tried to have conversations with the people that benefited, with the organisations that he invested the money in, from his activity in the slave trade, and also the money he received between 1835 to 1840 from the British government for compensation for all these people. So I have met organisations, the CEO of the Merchant Venturers, I met the Dean of Bristol, I met as many people as I could actually get hold of in a pandemic. I drove probably about 3,000 miles up and down to all the houses in the southwest that were involved with this family and the churches where they commemorated, and met with all these rectors, vicars of the churches to say, you have these plaques on these people and you have nothing to talk, to contextualize a history. I'm not interested in taking your statues down. I would like contextualized plaques to tell the real story. So as I said, cutting to the chase, on the 4th of June this year, I had a meeting with the Bishop of Bristol, the Dean of Bristol, and Bishop Joe Aldred of Churches Together England, who does a lot of work in the Windrush space and is on national conversations around Windrush. Perhaps you know him, Cassandra. Anyway, we had a very good discussion. It was about an hour and a half. I presented them a document of my findings of all the on this family and their relationship to the Church of England and their ties to the Church of England, because at least 15 members of this family were married to people in the clergy and significant people in the clergy. Suffice it to say, I'm going to be shortly today, I'm going to be releasing the press release that we jointly committed to talk about the work they are doing themselves, that they agreed to undertake, but to put the story of people like John Isaac, my great-great-grandfather, who I don't have an image of because he was enslaved. So the history I've been able to do on these families shows the gap of what we as descendants cannot do. I don't know if you've got time for me to share my document I presented to the church, or if that's too much. Liz, what do you think?
I think that would be so interesting, and we're so grateful that you've come to share this. So if folks aren't able to stay with us through the next 10, 15, hour long, 20 minutes that we're going to be recording, then they will be able to have a look at the recording in a few days' time. So please share it. I think that would be wonderful.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for listening. I appreciate your time. So I'm going to try and share and screen. Okay.
Now, have you arranged with Simon to do the share screen bit?
Oh, Simon.
Simon, are you?
It's all set. Anybody can share. Yeah.
Okay. So right. So this was the Church of England in May released a document, 32 pages, and it was called "Contested History in Cathedrals and Churches." So there are over 12,500 churches and cathedrals in the UK, and they are obviously undertaking and have committed to undertake looking at the statues, works of art that celebrate and honour people who, in my opinion, should not be honoured or celebrated. Clearly, I would say that. Anyway, so here we go. This I called my document "Corrected Historical Plaques," because that is what I would like to see, contextualised plaques. The conversation I had with the Bishop of Bristol, with the Dean of Bristol, with Bishop Joe of Churches Together England, was to engender that. So that's the first page. The second page was talking about the contested history. I'm going to go through it very, very quickly like Cassandra, because I'm aware that everyone hasn't got a lot of time. But this was the much discussed the Colston window in Bristol Cathedral. And if you can see at the bottom, you can see it's covered up by marine ply. So it's not the whole window. When I met the Dean last year, he said, well, we don't really want to cover up the whole window because it is a Good Samaritan and he did philanthropic work. And I just wanted to say, and I did say at the time, this was recorded on the BBC, it's an oxymoron to be a philanthropist and a slave owner. He was not these things. And this is from my gaze, everybody. So this is us flipping the gaze round to how we see it. This is a second window in Bristol Cathedral. You will see, gentlemen, there, the one at the bottom with the walking stick is Colston. So this has never been discussed. Everybody in Bristol Cathedral talks about the small amount of the coat of arms that are covered up at the bottom. This was a document, I bought a book, it's about 120 years old, and in the book, it just seemed very unusual, but in the book was this document talking about the Colston window going up, and who sponsored that Colston window going up. So that document is quite old. It's 1890, and it just arrived in my lap, quite luckily. So it was of the service given, and it tells you the arms that were being covered up by the cathedral today. So it's the Colston Arms, the Society of Merchant Venturers, the Dolphin Society, Bristol Cathedral, and Christ Hospital. So these are all significant organisations that I felt needed to be looked into, and their role in this transatlantic slave trade discussed more. Now this is the West Rose window in Bristol Cathedral. This West Rose window, when I first saw the original plaque, this was not discussed, but this West Rose window was put up by the children of Thomas Daniel III. So this was put up in 1875 to Thomas Daniel. Again, no mention of any of his activity in the cathedral. It just talks about being a respectable merchant. That is underneath the plaque, and that talks about the family, who he was. What was interesting to me was that in 2017, the window, which was old and a little bit decrepit, was restored in 2017 by an anonymous donation. I spent quite a lot of time trying to find out who had actually made that donation, and those investigations of mine are still ongoing. This is Henbury. This is another church in Gloucestershire, near Bristol. And these are memorials, as you can see, to other members of the Daniel family. So again, this was just highlighting people go into these churches every day, the people in the local communities, they say their prayers, etc. And there they are, all these memorials to enslavers, not to anybody else. This is also in Henbury. This is interesting. You were talking about George Africanus, because I didn't know him, Cassandra, but this is in Bristol, and there was a young enslaved manservant called Scipio Africanus. People realised this, even calling him this, was really people mocking him, as many of the names of our descendants in the Caribbean are. They're mocking names given by the colonialists, the planters, etc. Anyway, after the Colston statue came down, a few days later, this plaque that had been, these gravestones, which had been there for 200 years, were damaged by people believed it was, somebody from the far right. So in the cathedral, sorry, in the church, somebody very quickly put together a fundraiser to restore them. But what's interesting about these memorials is they were always granite. However, somebody in the 1980s thought it was a good idea to paint them, and you can see how it's, again, if these things are done with only a white gaze, they still continue to perpetrate violence on people of colour and descendants. So, for instance, the dreadful phrase on this is, "I was born a pagan and a slave, and here I am a Christian in my grave." But again, what I said to the bishop was, even here in 2021, you are not taking the opportunity to talk to people of colour and understand how you are still replicating the violence on people of colour. So, it's just restored as if it's okay. And isn't it okay that we've done this? Rather than look at it, take the opportunity to say, oh my goodness, it's a dreadful act that somebody from the far right broke this. The person had chalked on the pavement, "This is in retaliation to Elliot Colston." So I think we can understand how that person did not know a lot about his local history, because he even got the name of the enslaved person whose statue came down wrong. Anyway, this was something I presented to the bishop. Now this was 20 Berkeley Square was owned by Thomas's Daniel family. It was bought by them in 1802. I was very lucky. I met the manager of that building, and this was last summer, and he allowed me to look around the building because I kind of wanted to soak up the atmosphere of this person who had enslaved my great-great-grandfather. It is now part of the University Literature Club in Bristol. There wasn't, because it's a mod, even though it is a Georgian building, because of its uses today, it didn't have a sense of what I probably went there to try and engender. But what it did have was a safe full of documents, and he very kindly allowed me to photograph all these documents, which probably haven't seen the light of day for quite a long time. The reason why I'm showing you this is in 1889, the great-grandson of the original Thomas Daniel was proposing that this house was given to the Bishop of Bristol for their new residence. So there you could see again, this is the indenture, the lease of the property, and there you have in the corner the ecclesiastical church commissioners' coat of arms. They accepted it, and then apparently they found it wasn't suitable. One of the anecdotes, now this is not proven, so I do use the word, carefully, it's an anecdote, but it's an anecdote in the book for the university, the Bristol University and Literature Club. And one of the anecdotes is that when the builders in the 1890s were doing the work on this building, they were in the kitchen in the basement, and they had taken down a wall, and they found the body of a murdered girl. It was a coronary examination was done. It was a murdered girl, and they believed from the bones, from the clothes, that it was an enslaved or an African girl. So I have done a lot of research trying to find out more information on this young woman, but I haven't been able to find anything yet. But I will find out more information about her if I can, because for me, this is all about honouring people who are completely invisible in these discussions we are having. Anyway, so when the builders were doing this work, apparently their tools were being moved and they didn't like being there. Hence, this building was not used by the Bishop of Bristol for their new Palace of Bristol. This was press reports of the time of Henry Daniel giving up this. So this, I can send this later to you, Liz, so people can read that if they're interested. These are three memorials. Again, as you can see, I said it's a significant memorial to the enslaved is missing from the narrative. So these are 3 memorials I found in Bristol. Bearing in mind, Bristol, so much money was made by the transatlantic slave trade. Here we have an unauthorized plaque somebody has put up to 12 million lives across Western Europe taken. This is in Bristol. It's over the floating bridge. The floating bridge was put up because Bristol had difficulties getting ships into its harbour. Thomas Daniel was actually one of the investors in the floating harbour. But there at the end of it, it's a bridge, it's called Perrow's Bridge. Perrow was a young enslaved man who died at 18. Again, this was put up, I think, in the 1990s by Bristol, but this is the level of monument. This is the level of monument in Britain today. That's it. The name is given to a bridge, not the story, no contextualization. And again, on the M Shed in Bristol, where the Colston statue now lies for all to see, in his not in the glorious state, obviously. This is a plaque put up by Philippa Gregory, who is a novelist, a historical novelist, and this was put up I think it was in 2007. I think she put it up. Again, it talks about the countless lives. It mentions Philippa's name. It mentions the MP's name. It mentions that the member of European Parliament, but no mention of any enslaved people. Again, missing from the narrative. So this specific document was produced for the bishop, but I could amend this document I have done to many different organisations. So I can and will amend this document to Eton, to Oxford, to different organisations in and around Bristol, because this family was so interlinked with all these establishments that this type of document I produced could be sent and show them their culpability, their links to this family, hence to my family. So these are several members of the clergy directly involved with the Daniel family, marrying in, etc. They were all quite important figures in the clergy. This is a site in Studley. I'm meeting with a church warden. This is an important stained glass window. Again, for me, it was hypocrisy. This part of this church was the bells in the tower were restored with public funds, I might add, with public funds by Southwest Archaeology, restoring that, talking about the patronage of the Daniel family. Let's all save this church. Again, no mention of the enslaved people. public funds today, even though £20 million in 1833 was awarded for the abolition of slavery, not because anyone had great morals, but because they were being paid by the taxpayer. Again, we still see the taxpayer, lottery funds, etc., going into these organisations. I think these are important things to talk about. These are two more plaques. You see the Thomas Carey Daniel was the name I first saw. This is now, I made my first pilgrimage, if you will, to Studley to see this home on the 28th of June, 2020. And there he is, Thomas Carey Daniel. So now this is a sculpture done by my brother-in-law. This is an imagination of John Isaac. We have, obviously there are many members in our family, but we don't have a picture of John Isaac. So we've used all the male members of the family to imagine what John Isaac would look like. So this is the sculpture. I am in conversation now with the Bishop of Bristol. I am going to be working with them. So to tell our story, I believe they call it a meet there. So they want to do a meet the descendants or meet there. So we are proposing that we have this picture of John Isaac, meet John Isaac Daniel, to make the story accessible so the general public can understand the roots of where we are today and why George Floyd would be murdered. Why? And it was very interesting. It was very interesting listening to a conversation on the first speaker, the first professor from Sweden, because when he talked about the Code Noir, I mean, let's think about where we were. The same day George Floyd was murdered, Amy Cooper in New York called the police on a bird watcher because he challenged her behaviour. This is what she did on the same day. So how far have we come? Her call, Amy Cooper's call, was exactly the same as Code Noir. So we have not come very far at all. And if we don't have these conversations significantly everywhere we go, we are in trouble. We are in trouble, really, as a human race. So I'm not going to say, I said earlier on in the conversation, I said of mixed heritage. I am not joining the conversation of mixed race. I have used that word mixed race, but of mixed heritage, we are the human race and we better get to grips with it, else we're all in trouble, in my humble opinion. So this is what Teach Plaque sets out to achieve. Again, when the first speaker, the professor was talking, he was talking about funding. This is funded by me. This is me in my time, my work, I had my own job, but the site I am not a historian, I am just a descendant, but I'm trying to do this work and get the story out there. So anybody who shares a name in the Caribbean, we can look at that name and turn their gaze back to these people, turn the gaze back to them. They need to understand. I don't want to hear more conversations or see more brutal pictures of what they've done. We know, we're here. I want those people to start looking at themselves. So these are the ideas behind what we're trying to do. And when I spoke to the bishop, I showed you earlier on the West stained glass window. To the left of this crypt in the cathedral is a plain spot. So I said to the bishop, I think it's almost heaven sent. It's empty. And I felt my plaque for John Isaac and the 4,424 people who were enslaved by Thomas Daniel could go in there. We're talking. I had spoken to a letter carver because I knew we're dealing with buildings that are, grade 1 listed, grade 2 listed buildings, so you can't just go in there or anything. But I felt that if we used the church's own vernacular, that it could fit in there quite nicely. And again, it would be, a monument at last to the people who were so victimized by this trade. In speaking with the dean, in speaking with the bishop, we are in conversation. It's not agreed. It's on the table. But I think everybody knows it's time to really look at this, and address it. So we don't have booing on the terraces when players go about their job and are booed by English fans, and our Prime Minister and our Minister of Culture thinks it's okay to let these people boo. When somebody's doing a job, when you do your job, there are race laws to prevent you being racially harassed. But the same consideration is not being given by Oliver Dowden, the Minister for Culture, by Boris Johnson. The same law, when they said it's okay for them to boo, is not being considered. So here we go again, from the top, people not considering Black lives. So my plaque said, Black Lives Matter, I've got several things in there, under the Abolition Act, these were the people compensated, these were the amount of people compensated, Black Lives Matter today and tomorrow, and this plaque finally acknowledges their story. So that's that. This is T-Teach, as you know. T-Teach stands for Transatlantic Trafficked Enslaved African Corrective Historical Plaque. I am not learned like your good selves. I am not a historian, but I am trying to do what I can do as an individual. We started the petition. It was only a month before the meeting, had 305. There were some interesting names on there. I'm sure the cathedral, looked them up and decided, let's, this is a good conversation to be having, because this is the sort of thing which we can go viral on, and we should all want to be on the right side of history. This was the last bit. This was my belief, clear conscience. So I said it's the moral duty of the Church of England to take the lead, set the nation on the path to accountability. The lack of acknowledgement is an affront to the public conscience. In 2006, the General Synod of the Church of England apologised for its role in sustaining and profiting hugely from the transatlantic slave trade. It's been 15 years since the apology and almost no action has been undertaken. And I believe the Windrush scandal in Great Britain is a direct consequence of the lack of this action. So as we know, David Cameron, when he was Prime Minister, took himself off to Jamaica. And when the people of Jamaica thought he was coming there to apologise, to show a different stance, no. He wanted to talk about a prison that was being built by private enterprise, where they could return people from Britain who may have done, who knows what they may have done. But again, we're going straight back to the Code Noir that we talked about earlier on in this conversation. So that's how I ended that document. I can finishing getting it up. I'm going to stop the share. So that is me, everybody. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm very, very grateful for the conversation I had with the bishop. And of course, I am looking to work with them and looking to work with anybody. But, let's look at our names. Let's investigate them. But understand, the gaze is not just the academic gaze. It is not just your gaze. We are the descendants, and we are looking at you and your relatives and how you made your money and how you found your money. And that's what I'm here to say. And I hope everybody thinks that's valuable work.
Wow. Take your mics off and unmute yourself.
Thank you.
Wow, that was just fantastic. And you've put a great deal of effort into your research. And as a community researcher, I'm a community researcher. The team that set up these Black History Conversations, we're all community researchers. We're not academics.
Right, so sorry.
No, it's all right. But we think it's important because we need to look at the bigger picture. We have great colleagues with us like Applebaga Madden and Applebaga. I don't know if you'd like to make a comment, because that was just amazing. So Applebaga, I would like. He's not from so far away. He's in South Wales, dear. All right. Over to you, Apple.
Yes, Gloria, that was a brilliant presentation. You've said a couple of times, an academic, a professional, you shouldn't undermine yourself with the quality of work that you've done. There's passionate and drive, and what I find as an amateur, when I look at amateur archaeologists and historians, sometimes they seem to have something that many academics don't possess. This drive, this passion, and they end up uncovering things that sometimes academics are not able to uncover. And you mentioned a lot about this gaze. And I think sometimes when we're disadvantaged with resources, we have a particular gaze that sometimes citadels or academies which got these resources and sources and finances are unable to give or to recover. So I certainly want to take your details, work with you. You remind me a lot of myself, doors are being closed, etc. I was always digging, trying to find those missing pieces, etc. And I think people like yourself as individuals need our support. And I want to be one of those people to support you to the best of my ability, to get you out there. These things need to be in school resources. I was part of the working group for curricular change in Wales, as you already know, that Black history, along with Asian and minority ethnic history, is going to be taught throughout the whole of Wales. And with Bristol just being just across the border, I think there needs to be some connection with that, of having some of those sort of resources, you know, in the curriculum, especially for maybe level 3s and level, you know, key stage 3s and key stage 4, you know, sort of material. And with you being a woman as well, that needs to be highlighted as well, you know, because one of the issues and problems, you know, many of us Black historians do have is that we're sometimes undermining the female contribution from our community. And I think that needs to go out as well, because, you know, females have a lot to say. You know, they were damaged during the time of slavery, enslavement, what they had to go through. You know, they were raped, they had to have children. Sometimes they had to name their children after the rapist. This was legal. You know, these things need to really come out. So I commend you for your presentation. Keep up the good work. Make sure you give me your details, or so I'll never forgive you.
I promise.
I want to work alongside with you, and whatever assistance I can do to, you know, to push your work out there, you know, please let me know. But thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we have two great messages here that I must read out from the chat. From Professor Saki Fwachat in Jos University, Nigeria. He says, that was a great presentation, Gloria. It feels you're in the history of the family secrets and genealogies. You didn't sound amateur at all. So great credit to you there. And then the second one from Dr. Jim Thakordin, an excellent presentation. We need to encourage such research in every city, town, borough and parish in the UK. And I think by the model of what you're doing, I think this is what I'm finding interesting about community research, is that people are looking at things from different perspectives to the many academics who have done excellent work over the years. I'm not putting them down at all, but often are very much in a very specific, focused way. And we in the community can do that as well. We can focus on our own communities or our own families, and we can research those stories. That was absolutely excellent. And we do need more time to talk and discuss. We've got a particularly busy program today, but that was marvelous. But what we have done is that we've committed ourselves as a group of people, friends now, to follow up several things and to support several initiatives. And certainly, as Apobaga Madden said, definitely yours would be something we want to follow up, follow what you're doing, support what you're doing, because we have a resource of an incredible range of people. So we can ask advice of others and test out ideas. So that's really wonderful. Okay, Sarah, you want to come in?
I was just going to say, Gloria, I've just sent you an email as you were speaking so brilliantly. I'm working at a church at the moment in Nottingham, and we've got a rector who claimed compensation from Slavery Compensation Act. It's a really complicated story, but the church is really behind it on the whole, and we're putting a memorial on site to enslaved people. So it would be really good I've tried to get the content, the memorial, in a kind of co-produced way. And we have got a mix of white people and a mix of Black people, but I'm really aware that no one in the group is from an enslaved ancestry. And we're keen to keep it sort of in the church, but at the same time, we do need that wider sort of perspective, really. So I've sent you an email. If you'd like to have a chat,
I'd love to.
It'd be absolutely fantastic. And yeah, just like everyone else is saying, it was amazing. And I'm not an academic either. And, you know, that's good. That's okay. We need a bit of variety. So well done.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks so much for listening. I really appreciate it.
Wonderful. And Sarah, I know you're going to, now you've made contact with us through Simon, you're going to stay in touch with us, and you're going to progress for us what's happening with the story. Now, one of the things that we're going to do is we're putting together a special website, which will be a resource website, so that we can follow different threads. And I think this thread of the contested history in churches and cathedrals is a very, very important thread. And if I can say, Sarah, I'm not altogether surprised that you haven't actually got representation in your congregation from the Black community, because we're coming up to Windrush Day next Tuesday, and we have to recognise that one of the significant things was that the churches didn't reach out to those fellow Christians who came over on the Windrush and in the years afterwards. You know, it's just one of those things, but it's one of those things that something needs to be done about, and people can think. And this is a jolly good step forward that you're doing. So
we have got some representation. We have got some representation from the Black community, but we haven't got people from an enslaved heritage, and I think that's different. Do you know what I mean? So, and you know, obviously, you know, it's a you know, sort of an ongoing thing. But yeah, definitely, we need more representation as well. Do you know what I mean? So it's really important. Yes.
Okay, well, I think at this stage, Jim, I was going to come back to you, but I would like to ask those of you who want to carry on talking now. I think that Simon, are we okay to leave this running after? But anyway, we'll wrap up now.
Yeah, we can.
Ask Simon to end the recording when I've said thank you to everyone. So big thank you to Professor Fredriksson, who joined us from Uppsala University in Sweden. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much to Professor Sati Bakchat, who joined us from Jos University, to Cassandra Gupta, who joined us from telling us about her work in Nottingham, but knowing that she's now involved in the University of Hull as works there as a researcher. Also, thank you so much, Gloria Daniel, to hear about your project. And that's a really, really important thing that we want to follow through. Thank you very much as well to yourself, Sarah, for joining us and adding in, and we're going to be following that through. Now, we also have to say a big thank you to Professor Brinsley Samaru, who hasn't joined in the conversation in this session, but we're going to invite him again. So when we finish the recording, please stay on.